Welcome to a special edition of Power Play. I'm Vashi Capellos, coming to you from the foyer of the House of Commons on this, I think it's Tuesday evening. The federal government has just tabled its budget, one that they have categorized as a once-in-a-generation budget. Here is Federal Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne standing up in the House of Commons to deliver the news.
Bold and swift action is what is needed. To weather the storm of uncertainty, we will not lower ourselves, Mr. Speaker. Quite the opposite. We will raise them to catch the winds of economic change because we believe in Canada.
There is a lot for us to unpack from both a policy and political perspective. The politics of this budget has been a focus now for a number of days in the lead up to it. Will it force an election? That is going to depend on whether the government is able to garner enough support from opposition parties. And to that end, we are going to speak to all of them. The interim leader of the NDP, Don Davies, will be here. The Conservatives House Leader, Andrew Scheer, will be here as well. And so will Federal Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne. First, though, to the details of this budget, the headline numbers that you need to know. The big one, of course, is the deficit, which is going to come in at $78.3 billion, far higher than was projected at last year's fall economic statement, and even far higher than projected just a number of weeks ago by the parliamentary budget officer, who said it could top out in the neighborhood of $65 billion. It will instead run at about $78 billion. There's lots of other stuff in here, though, that leads the government to that number. And for more details on what you need to know about what's in this budget, I'm joined live by our chief financial correspondent, Amanda Lang, who has spent the last hour, as soon as that embargo lifted, going through the details of what's in it. I know we just finished the special and you were flagging some of the incentives that the government is putting in place that they say will spur economic growth and productivity. In layman's terms, why do you think that is so important?
So the interesting thing to me about this budget, Vashi, is they did pre-announce a lot of the things that we would say fall into the affordability kind of bucket. They're building more homes, trying to help on the housing file. They'd already done that income tax for middle-class Canadians, although they kind of reiterated here it's costing about $28 billion. But it is that Canada's productivity problem, our economy was already facing some weaknesses, and they're addressing it in this budget, and they're doing it in a way that's very aggressive. I mean, when the finance minister says we're putting up our sales, they're making a big bet, and the bet is if you create an environment for investment, people will come and the investment will happen. Business investment in Canada has been falling for decades, and it costs all of us. So they're going to spend by creating tax incentives. There's a whole host of them across a whole range of different categories. It's immediate depreciation. So if you're a business person, you get the credit immediately. It really incentivizes you to do it. Will it work is the question. It's very bold. They're also spending, Vashi, in a way that I think is very important on trade diversification, and they put very specific kind of strategies around that, trying to get big businesses to diversify, working on our transport corridors, digitizing our ports, digitizing our infrastructure around transportation. Those are all really important investments and may actually spur economic activity in this country in the short term. We will focus, of course, on the deficits, and they are saying there will be cuts to the civil service. That will be painful, and that may actually, be a drag for a bit of friction on the economy, of course. But what they're also saying is they think that the investment here will attract 3 times the capital that they're spending, that private capital will crowd into the Canadian economy. It's a big gamble, Vashi, but it's clearly, to me, that's the centerpiece of this budget. It's not about building homes. It's not about pipelines to Tidewater. It's about fixing Canada's productivity problem, which has been around longer than you've been alive.
Okay, I think that's true. All right, Amanda, thanks so much for your perspective. I appreciate it. Our chief financial correspondent, Amanda Lang. And if you look at the bottom of your screen on the ticker there, you will see each of the details of the budget, the ones that we have deemed, of course, after looking through this 400-page document, the most important to convey to you. And we're going to unpack those details throughout the hour. This is, however, a political show. The budget, while it's a policy document, is also inherently a very political document. And so we've got to get reaction to what's in this budget and what isn't in this budget from opposition parties with whom the fate of this budget rests, right? Because this is a minority government, the Liberals have to secure support from opposition parties in order to pass the budget and in order for there not to be an election anytime soon. To that end, I'm joined live here by the interim leader of the New Democrats, Don Davies. Mr. Davies, a pleasure to see you as always. I appreciate you making the time.
Great to be here, Vashi.
Do you know if you're going to support this budget?
We don't yet. We just got a lockout about an hour ago. We haven't had a chance to meet as a caucus yet, which we'll be doing tonight. We plan on studying the budget and really understanding it tonight, and then we'll meet tomorrow morning and start having our political discussions. And we also want to check with some stakeholders and hopefully talk to Canadians, particularly working Canadians, and find out whether this budget's responsive to their needs.
You had identified coming into the introduction of this budget, primarily you didn't want to see a budget of austerity, which a few months ago was one of the ways in which the Prime Minister had described it, much less now. And you wanted to see enough on the investment side of the ledger. They have maintained all the social program spending that they had indicated that they would, the transfers to individuals, the transfers to provinces, the lunch program, the dental care program, a whole host of other programs that had been put in place under the previous government. Is that enough to signal to you that the concern you had expressed was taken seriously?
Well, I always think it's important to contextualize this budget a little bit. We haven't had one in 18 months, and the country's facing, I think, very serious economic issues. Unemployment's at 10-year highs, particularly hard for young people, 1 in 6 people out of work. We have skyrocketing prices and everything from groceries to rent. Economic growth is weak, and we have, of course, our serious problems from south of the border. So serious affordability issues, and our economy, I think, is I do agree with the Prime Minister, it's at a bit of a crossroads. So we want to see a budget that has investments. And so this budget is a complex one. There's things in there that we like and things in there that we don't like. And we're going to be taking the time to kind of evaluate them and see where it comes out in the balance.
On principle, though, can you acknowledge that a $78 billion deficit does signal that the government leaned way more toward investment than to austerity?
Yeah, and let me say, I'll give you some things I like and some things I don't like. So there's $51 billion announced in infrastructure spending, and it's at least notionally tied to unionized work or community benefit agreements, which is wage prevailing rates. So that meets one of the NDP's calls, which is good union jobs to be created with taxpayer dollars. The east-west electricity grid is mentioned on page 1 of the budget, which is something we campaigned on. And finally, there's a specific box and highlight of co-op housing, which is something the NDP has long fought for. On the negative side of the ledger, you've got cutting 40,000 public sector jobs. And when you have a jobs crisis, putting 40,000 well-paying jobs or people out of work is going in the wrong direction, we think. And behind every person is a service. So, do Canadians want to wait 6 months to get a passport? You want to wait 3 months to get your call back from CRA, or seniors waiting to get their OAS checks? I don't think so. And
do you think that's true, though, just if I may interrupt for a moment, because if you think back 10 years or pre-pandemic era, when the size of the public service was substantially smaller than it is now, were passport services that much worse? Were services at the CRA that much worse? My goodness, the Auditor General, even with this level of employment, is signaling that you can't even get a right answer if you're lucky enough to get through. So is it that quid pro quo, that the amount of people working for the public service is directly correlated with the level of service that Canadians retain? Because I would contend that it's not.
Well, there's a number of factors that go into that. For one thing, I think the public service had been cut prior to that, so I think it had been growing back to its natural state. Also, the population has grown significantly in the last 6 years. The growth of the public service far outpaces population. It does, but also so have the programs. For instance, we didn't have dental care. Didn't have the Canadian Dental Care Plan 5 years ago either. So there's been an increase in services. When I see that CRA, their answers are correct to Canadians only 17% of the time, that doesn't tell me that we have too many people working in CRA. So I do think that it's important to put that in context. The couple other things I would say I don't like about the budget are they're getting rid of the empty homes tax, which was a measure aimed at particularly foreign investors who bought homes for investment purposes and left them empty when we have a housing crisis. So this tax kind of was encouraging them to put those housing units into the market. So this government inexplicably is removing that, which I would guess will take those houses out of the market. That's the wrong direction to go in. And finally, there's no digital services tax. At a time when we have a revenue problem, Vashi, and this government says we have to cut and make sacrifices, why are we not taxing the biggest U.S. tech companies in the world. We're talking
because it
Mark
put us at
Zuckerberg.
odds with Donald Trump
Well,
and with Joe Biden. Because
yeah.
it put us at odds with a U.S. government in both cases that was taking, in this case, I should say, is taking direct aim at us.
Yeah. Well, that's why I like a budget that satisfies Canadians, not one that satisfies Donald Trump. And I think it's going to take some political guts in this country. It's a tax that the Liberals worked on since 2021. It raises $1 billion on profits made by those companies in Canada, over $20 million. I don't think it's too much to ask that those tech giants pay some tax on the money that they make here in Canada from Canadians. It's a political choice, but when you have a revenue problem, you can either ask Canadians to tighten their belts and you can lay off public sector workers, or you can tax Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. I would rather tax those people.
How serious are you about those concerns? Are you willing, as a party, to put, to not provide your support to this budget, therefore leaving the country? And I'm not blaming you, but I'm saying that that's your right. Therefore, putting us in a situation where we're in another election, or will you put the interests of your party, which is, by objective measure, nowhere near a place where most would want to be to contend an election, will you put those interests ahead of the ones you just spelled out for Canadians?
Well, we're going to honor the lens that we announced from the beginning, which is we're going to analyze this budget through the lens of whether it's good for working people in this country.
But you've just told me it isn't.
No, I haven't said that it isn't. I've said that there's a number of factors on the plus side and the negative side, and we haven't had a chance to examine the entire budget and understand its full implications. It's a serious budget, Vashi, a critical budget at a critical time, and it deserves, I think, a really good, thorough, comprehensive look at it. And we'll analyze it as a whole, but I'm well aware that 6 months ago we just had an election. The country is in fairly serious economic problems. I don't think Canadians want an election. I don't think we particularly need one, but again, that's up to Mr. Carney. I want to ask maybe whether or not he's open to making changes to this budget. That may be a possibility as well.
Is that something that you'd be interested in? You
Absolutely.
would pursue that with him?
We're going to talk as a caucus tomorrow, and if this budget is not good enough yet, that's an option for us to do.
I just have one final question for you, and it's about something you said over the weekend, in which you laid out the possibility that nothing was off the table, including abstention. And I think for a lot of Canadians, when you just describe the moment we're in, the important context of this moment, the significance of this document against the backdrop of that moment, how can you at the same time say it's okay to sit this one out?
Well, abstaining isn't sitting something out. It's taking a position. One of the interesting things about this moment is we're not only examining the budget and whether or not it's good for Canada and Canadians, but the unique implication of this right now is that it could cause an election 6 months after another election. That's not usually the case. So that's something that weighs on us. I'm a Jack Layton New Democrat. Jack said it's our job to come here to Parliament and make it work for Canadians. We want to be propositional. We want to be positive. I want to focus on policies that will help Canadians who are suffering. 50% of Canadians in this country are living paycheck to paycheck fashion. So they've sent us here not to play political games or to decide what's in our partisan interests, but can we work together and find solutions to make lives better for those people? That's my first priority.
But what does
we'll
abstention fit into? How does abstention fit into that? It is sitting it out. Mm-hmm. Instead of taking a stand one way or the other, it is sitting it out. And I'm not sure that's what Canadians elected New Democrats to do here.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's one of the options we have. I guess it's suitable in a position where the budget is not in a position where we can support it. They haven't earned, let's say, an MP's votes, but perhaps neither do they want to bring down the government and go to an election.
Is that your position?
No, that's the objective position that
but
would
you
express.
Haven't landed on
that's
that yet.
why no, that's why it's a totally legitimate option in this case. You can vote yes, you can vote no, you can abstain, and each one of those positions has an implication on whether this government exists, survives or not. And so we're going to take serious consideration to all of them.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Mr. Davies, I appreciate your time as always.
Thank you
very much. Don Davies is the interim leader of the New Democratic Party. We're going to get more reaction from other opposition parties, including after a short commercial break. The the House leader of the Conservatives, the government's finance minister, will be here a little bit later on. We're back in a moment with more of this special edition of Power Play from the House of Commons.
With this plan, in 5 years, we will enable $1 trillion in total investment in this country, Mr. Speaker. Enable $1 trillion of investment.
I hardly see how, after having met with our caucus tonight, we could vote in favor of this budget.
We're going to talk to Canadians, particularly working Canadians, and review this budget to see if this budget passes our lens of whether it works for working Canadians.
As it stands right now, would you vote no on the budget?
Absolutely. There's no way that we can, as Greens, vote yes on this budget. But I want to emphasize there are several days in which this budget can be negotiated and amended before it goes to a vote.
All right, that's Federal Finance Minister first off the top there, François-Philippe Champagne delivering the budget in the House of Commons, and then reaction from various opposition parties. We are still waiting for the leader of the Conservative Party, Pierre Poilievre, to deliver his reaction in the House of Commons. After that happens, we'll talk to the Conservatives House Leader, Andrew Scheer. But we have heard, as I mentioned there, from all the other parties. So we've got a special edition of The Front Bench to unpack what happens now. Joining me this evening, former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant is here. He's the CEO now of Space Canada. CTV's political analyst and former Conservative Industry Minister James Moore is with us. He's now a policy advisor at Edelman. Next to him, that's of course Tom Mulcair, our political analyst at CTV and former leader of the federal New Democrats. Next to me here in the foyer of the House of Commons is Stephanie Levitt. She's a senior reporter in the Globe and Mail's Parliament Hill Bureau. Hi, everybody. Good to be with you tonight. Steph, I'll start with you because you're right here, you were listening to everyone. I feel like it's a clear no from Blanchette, a clear no from Elizabeth May, anything but a clear no from Mr. Davies. It looks like, maybe. Yeah, a hard maybe and a probably, if anything, abstain.
Yes, I mean, it seemed he said something, to the reporter's question about this. Two things that were interesting. What about abstaining? And he made a reference to the fact that maybe there are some MPs in caucus who, for whatever reason, don't want to vote with everybody else in caucus. So that obviously opens a door for some MPs to carry the weight here of saying, you know what, we don't love this budget, we also don't want an election right now. And that's probably the line that's the safest for everybody to walk, because Mr. Davies was also asked the question, how does a party that's presents itself as like the voice of unions, progressive Canadians, vote for a budget that has tens of thousands of job cuts in it? And he explained that they're not actually sure how they're going to do that.
Yeah, they're going to meet tonight, Tom, and discuss it. But I just finished interviewing Mr. Davies, and he was kind of even defending the idea of abstention, which to me leads me, he may not have the ultimate say over caucus because it is fairly disparate. But if it were up to him, I do not think they would be forcing an election over this.
Fair enough, but an accident can happen. And Elizabeth May was so categorical, and it's understandable, getting rid of the tree planting program at a time when we know that just the 2023 wildfires destroyed 8.6 billion trees, saying that we're getting rid of a program that was seeking to put back 2 billion seems unbelievable, especially since what they're actually cutting, because a lot of it's already committed, is peanuts. So it's a signal that they're sending on the environment. Talking about getting rid of the caps on oil and gas emissions, in case carbon capture and storage works. Hey, you know what, Vashi? Trees are great at capturing carbon. But that's the thing. The NDP is sort of stuck right now. They've got 7 people. And the inference that was just made with regard to the possible split, don't forget, it's their self-description. The 3 women who are the 3 racialized women in caucus felt very hard done by when the party decided that Don Davies was the leader. I don't think that wound is healed from what I've been getting. We're talking about MPs from Vancouver, Winnipeg, and Nunavut. And I have a feeling that the 3 of them might be saying, look, we're going to show that our votes count. And they've got, by the way, safer, if such a thing exists, safer NDP riding. So the party is in a bind right now. Don Davies was trying to skate around it. I was also there with Jack Layton. I never heard Jack Layton saying that anybody who abstained was actually doing their job in Parliament. I don't know a single person that in my life who's ever said, I want to go to Parliament so I can abstain. So I think they might have to work on their lines a little bit.
James, what do you think about the possibility of an accident happening here? And what's your sort of read on where this goes after hearing from various opposition leaders?
Well, and frankly, further to Tom's point, it was the abstention of Liberals in the 08 to 11 Parliament and Jack Layton skewering Michael Ignatieff in that leaders debate by saying you don't get a promotion at work if you fail to show up. So I mean, there is a legacy there that's being contradicted by Mr. Davies. I think what's going to happen between now and tomorrow. And by the way, Vashi, I don't know if there's an elegant way to try to nail Jell-O to a wall, but you tried very effectively there with Mr. Davies. But clearly they don't know where they're going to go. In part because of what Tom just mentioned about the dynamic in the New Democrat caucus. But I also have to think that the headline issue for progressive voters that Don Davies and the New Democrats want to sort of lasso themselves to, he's going to be looking at the response of CUPE and the Public Service Alliance and those public sector unions across the country and the amount of heat that they're going to have around this budget, because while there's an NDP leadership race going on, New Democrats need to, I think, reflect that heat. And if their opening position of those unions is going to be red hot against Mark Carney and his positioning about those public sector cuts, the NDP have to align to that. Otherwise, why, frankly, do they exist? With a diminished party as they are, why do they exist if they don't echo those voices? So I think that's going to put Mr. Davies in a tough spot. He can't corral his caucus, and he has to reflect those voices from the outside. So I think they're in a very tough spot to reconcile where they're going to be.
Both Mr. Davies and Ms. May, Brian, indicated that they were hopeful there could be post-budget negotiations prior to a vote. What do you think the chances of that are?
I think it's possible. I mean, look, I think my colleagues are making great points. I'll make the one that is sort of underlying all of it as well. I mean, I think if a party is seen to throw us into an election, Canadians ain't going to be impressed. I think that would be probably the wrong thing to do at the wrong time, to say the least. People never really like an election, but certainly given the circumstances and how long has gone since the last one, I think people will be quite irritated about that. Nevertheless, you can still find yourself in a campaign. People will kind of posture to try to blame others, and people will ultimately still have to decide who their MPs and by extension their government will be. So you can still fall into an election even if everybody's pretty upset about it. Look, I think the post-negotiation can certainly happen. My sense, this is literally just by watching the media and sort of watching the Prime Minister and the posturing of the government, I think they're just going to basically say, look, this is the budget, and if you don't want to vote for it, go tell Canadians why you're sending us into an election. They'll probably have that somewhat publicly. I think behind the scenes, there have probably already been discussions with parties, most likely the NDP, and I would assume that they'll certainly reach out to see what would it take for you to support this. I think the Prime Minister feels certainly like he has some wind in his sails after a few months in government and probably still a bit of a honeymoon to be able to ride this out and play this game of chicken, if you will. Not a game, but you get why I'm saying that. And I also think that the NDP and to some extent the Greens, but I think the NDP will feel a lot of pressure on their shoulders to basically say, are we ready to be potentially blamed for this sort of a new election campaign in 2025?
So if you are just joining us now, the federal budget has been tabled and we are getting reaction into that budget from opposition parties. At the bottom of your screen, we've got some of the highlights of actually what is in the budget. And we've talked about the politics now for a second. If you take in the aggregate what is in this budget, Stephanie, what is the message that you think the government is actually like? We know what they wanted to send. What are they actually delivering, do you think? Can you identify it?
I mean, I would say that there's a high-level takeaway for a lot of people, and it might be this. Over the last decade of Liberal government, the Canadian public has been really conditioned to believe when the government says we're going to transform your life, we're going to change your life, it means we're going to pay for your life. And in this instance, what we have is a government doing sort of the opposite of that. And they are turning to the private sector and they're saying, your turn. We have done a lot of things over time. We are still going to spend some money. But as the Prime Minister once famously said in his days in the private sector and in the central bank, there's a lot of lazy corporate capital out there. And it's time for you guys to start spending and for us to spend less. That's interesting because it puts a lot of pressure on the corporate Canada to deliver on the promise Mr. Carney is making to Canadians. And if they don't build those new factories, change their production lines, do all of the things that he says is going to juice the Canadian economy, where does that leave him in the end?
Well, and he's attaching very specific numbers to that promise, Tom. He's saying $500 billion over 5 years in extra private capital will come into Canada. What do you think of that?
That's aspirational, as they like to say, but what I know is that they're promising, and this one they will deliver on, more than $300 billion in new debt on the backs of future generations over the next 5 years, because those are their own numbers, and that's at the very minimum. That's what they're going to be leaving on the backs of future generations. So we're not only leaving them a huge environmental debt, we're leaving them a huge economic debt, and there's no plan to get away from it. One of the problems that I see from a simple, basic political communications point of view, I watched the entry into the House of Commons by both Prime Minister Carney and Finance Minister Champagne, and they were doing the opposite of any good common sense. They were setting the bar so high. And then once he stood up, we just watched Champagne walk under that bar. He never met that bar. None of the promise of generational, transformational spending and change is there. Even the stuff about the public service is, well, we'll sort of let the baby boomers retire early and maybe we'll tap into a theoretical surplus in the pension funds to get them out faster, but there's no plan around that. You know, when Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien went after the years of deficit spending that we had, they did it seriously. Here it's just guesswork and, well, let's hope something proper comes of it. That's the problem. That, for me, is the basic flaw in this whole budget process that we've just seen. A lot of that spending's already taken place. That's not their fault. That is fair to say. But at the same time, they haven't done their part of the job, I don't think.
Are there too many, to Tom's point, assumptions built into what they're saying this budget will do for Canadians, James?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's blocks of funding, especially the bulk of new spending on the defense side. That's, you know, defense procurement is a challenge. A lot of that's going to go to salaries as well. And also on the tax incentive side for businesses to invest and reinvest back into the Canadian economy. Again, good policies, but they're going to take a long time to have sort of practical, real application and sense of accomplishment for the economy. By the way, the scale of deficits, I think to Tom's point, like, you know, the scale of deficits, you know, I was on your show just a couple days ago, Bashing, and I quoted the number from the fall economic update, $53 billion per year is what we're paying to service the debt. In the budget that was just tabled today, it's now over $70 billion. Again, to put that number in perspective, if as a revenue stream, you would have to have a 15% GST in this country to draw in the revenue necessary just to pay for the cost of servicing our debt, and that number is only going to grow over time. Another thing I noted, and I think it's worth mentioning as well, Vashi, is a clear pivot away from a lot of the policy legacy of Justin Trudeau in this budget, right? We saw it early with the elimination of the consumer carbon tax, the flip-flop backwards on the capital gains tax proposals that Minister Freeland put in place, the emissions caps that have now been reversed on as well. And then there's this admission, like in the budget document itself, it says this, quote, if Canada's productivity growth had matched the United States from 2017 to 2023, the median income of a family of one child would be nearly $11,000 higher. Like just explicitly in the budget saying that the last 10 years have failed. And that's text from a budget being delivered by François-Philippe Champagne, who was a key minister in that government. I don't know how these ministers are going to frankly survive if there's going to be credibility behind the actions of pivoting away from Justin Trudeau's policies, if his ministers are the people who are delivering lines like that.
Brian, I'll give you the last word on this, and in particular, the content of the budget. I agree that a lot of this was aimed at sort of embodying what they did during the election campaign, which was try and say, I'm Mark Carney, I'm not Justin Trudeau. Why do you think that would be part of the political purpose of this document? And based on the content, what you've observed so far, do you think they delivered enough on that?
I think it's political posturing for sure, in the sense that they would have had the impression, I think most of us did, that Canadians were sort of done with the Trudeau era. So they're trying to put a demarcation line in the sand and say this is a new era. And also, I just think Prime Minister Carney is different than former Prime Minister Trudeau, and certainly has a different view on how the economy should work and where public finances should go and what type of programs there should be. So I think those two things make it that James is right to say pretty stark that it's actually in the budget and they're making that contrast. Look, I think the one thing about this budget that would worry me if I were them from a communications point of view, they're investing, they're cutting, they are letting the private sector take over. There's still major deficits of the government. It's a hard message to package this one kind of thesis. But governing is complex, and they're certainly not the first government that's going to have to try to figure out competing messages and how you kind of wrap that up so Canadians can understand what they're trying to accomplish.
Okay, I've got to take a quick commercial break. Our front bench, I think, will be with us throughout the rest of the evening as we aim to parse apart what this budget means for you and what it means politically. We're hoping that the leader of the Conservatives in the House of Commons, Andrew Scheer, will be our next guest. He is making his way to our set, and we'll be back with you in just a moment. Hi there, and welcome back to a special edition of Power Play. I'm Vashi Capellos, coming to you live this evening from the foyer of the House of Commons. We're continuing our coverage of the federal budget and reaction to it. To that end, I have with me here the House Leader for the Conservatives. Earlier, I teed you up as the government House Leader, but no, the House Leader of the Conservatives, Andrew Scheer, who's with me here in the foyer live. Mr. Scheer, before I get into your reaction to the budget, I got to ask you, we just got into our inbox. An MP of yours, Chris D'Entremont, has quit caucus, has resigned from caucus. Your reaction to that and what it says about your party?
Well, it's disappointing that Chris D'Entremont has decided that he doesn't want to fight for a more affordable life for Canadians, that he doesn't want to fight inflationary deficits that are driving up grocery prices in his riding. You know, he's now telling constituents that he just got their votes just a few months ago, that now he's in favor of the industrial carbon tax on things like farm equipment and fertilizer, driving up food costs, that he's in favor of fuel standards that the Liberals are imposing that's going to increase gasoline by 17 cents a litre. So, you know, he'll have to go back to the supporters in his riding that dug deep into their own pockets to support his campaign and explain why he took their precious time and resources and then turn their back on them just a few months later.
Might it be that he doesn't think your party's solutions are the correct ones now?
Well, you know, he ran on them in the platform. He saw our platform and he said, yes, I support all this back in April when Conservatives were offering hope to young Canadians who couldn't find jobs, who had to move back in with their parents, back into their parents' basement. Our platform offered hope for young Canadians. Mark Carney's message is one of sacrifice, that Canadians who have been hammered hard by the cost of living crisis are going to have to sacrifice even more to feed a ever-growing budget, a deficit that's going to add billions to the national debt that has to be paid off with interest. So Mr. D'Entremont's going to have to explain that to his constituents.
And I hope we have definitely requested an interview, and I'll be asking him those questions. But ultimately, what does it say that there might be enough in this budget and the way in which this Prime Minister is governing to satisfy someone who ran just a few months ago as a Conservative? Does that not say something more largely about your party?
I wouldn't read too much of that. I know Mr. D'Entremont has had some personal grievances about the fact that, you know, he didn't get elected Deputy Speaker. He's been kind of upset about that. So I'm disappointed that he let his own personal grievances get in the way of his commitment to his constituents, that he would fight for a more affordable budget to bring down the cost of living, to lower the tax burden on Canadians. But again, he's going to have to explain to all the people that he looked in the eye, took their donations, put signs on their lawns, and then explain why he betrayed them just a few months later.
Let's talk a little bit about the content of the budget. This government is decreasing immigration, getting rid of climate policies your party wanted gone, and cutting the public service. If you believe, as you told Canadians during the election, that those things will better our country, isn't this budget worth supporting?
Why do you say they're shrinking the size of the federal
public service by 40,000 jobs?
Well, you know, what I saw was a deficit of $55.6 billion. Sorry, that's public debt shares. The deficit under Mark Carney is even bigger than under Justin Trudeau.
I didn't say they're not spending, but I'm saying that they are cutting the public service, which is something you advocated for.
Well, first of all, there's a lot of notional things that they're hoping Canadians will trust them that will actually come to fruition. When you see a government that's announcing new programs, massive amounts of new inflationary spending that's going to drive up that deficit, I don't see that as the government getting smaller. I see more and more Canadians having to work harder, pay more taxes to pay the interest on that debt that Mark Carney's racking up. I mean, what Mark Carney has essentially said is, after 10 years of inflationary deficits and massive overspending by Justin Trudeau, Mark Carney is saying the problem in Canada is that the government wasn't spending enough, that the deficit wasn't big enough, and that the debt was not big enough. You know that now under Mark Carney, more of your tax dollar is going to pay the interest on that debt than on health care? That's not sustainable.
I have a number of questions for the minister about the level of debt service charges, and I do take your point on that. I also think back to the last time we, as a country, were in a crisis in 2008 and 2009. And I remember the Prime Minister at the time, Stephen Harper, spending a lot of money on infrastructure in order to stimulate the economy. When I look at the line items that add to increased spending to drive up that deficit, a huge chunk in this case is exactly that, is spending on infrastructure in order to spur economic growth against the backdrop of an economic crisis. Why was it okay then and not now?
Well, what The difference was targeted investments after years of balanced budgets, bringing Canada's fiscal house back in order, versus now when we see a government that's really spending a lot of money on areas that's not going to benefit Canadians. There's not a single affordability measure in this budget, not a single thing that's going to lower grocery prices or reward hard work. This is a budget that's creating new ways for the government to spend money. It's bloating bureaucracies. All the things they're talking about are notional and far off. I look at the tables that they actually put in the budget. Investments going down this quarter, it went down last quarter, they're projecting it to go down next quarter. This is all since Mark Carney's become Prime Minister.
So what would you have them do? Nothing? Because that's like, do you think that would resonate with Canadians? I mean, you're literally describing a situation where because of the economic crisis, investment is declining. Is there no role for government at all in stimulating a reversal of that in the same way that we did see Stephen Harper do?
Okay, I bristle when you say the choice is either what the Liberals have or nothing. You know, Pierre has outlined a lot of concrete measures to help stimulate investment in Canada. For example, exempting capital gains taxes from people who reinvest in Canada. That's a concrete measure that would help bolster that investment. I also object to the idea that there's an economic crisis that is just appearing on the horizon. Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau, the Liberal government, purposefully tried to destroy the energy sector in this country. That's a sector that provides billions of dollars in investments. Mark Carney said he cheered on when when the Liberal government canceled Northern Gateway. He advised that the carbon tax was set too low. He supported all those policies that chased away all that investment. Now Conservatives are saying let's bring that investment home with things like cutting the capital gains tax on reinvestments in Canada. Mark Carney goes down to Washington and says his plan is to increase Canadian investment in the United States to try to appease Donald Trump. So he's really been all over the map when it comes to investment.
There are specific incentives, though, built into this budget that aren't just about spending to do exactly what you're stipulating, right? They signal that they're going to remove the emissions cap, which is something the Conservatives have long asked for in order to spur development on the energy side of things. They're extending the carbon capture tax credits, which oil companies specifically have been asking for, I think all the way out until 2040. And they're reducing the marginal tax rate. Like, isn't that exactly what you spelled out? And why are you sort of reflexively saying all of it is wrong?
Well, we're not reflexively. We had the budget documents throughout the day. We've been going through it. And one thing I did notice is that they are increasing the industrial carbon tax. So it's not really fair to say they're eliminating the production cap on oil and gas when they're increasing the carbon tax on that very same
Do we know
sector.
for sure it's going to increase? Because it sounded, when I read through it, it was like stabilizing it, making sure there's certainty. You know for sure that it's going to increase. I saw the word enhance,
strengthen. Those are Liberal code words for it's going to. They actually, I believe, I'm correct in saying this, that they actually said that because they're doing these other measures on the industrial carbon tax, that would be the justification on the production cap. So they're literally saying because they're robbing Peter, they're able to pay Paul. We're not better off as a country when that happens. What we'd like to see is get rid of the industrial carbon tax altogether. We don't need, we used to live in a country where investors wanted to come into our country because we had lower tax rates and stable regulatory regimes. 10 years of Liberal government has made it virtually impossible to get anything built in this country. The only way that there's even a glimmer of hope is with a piece of legislation that allows them to bypass some of those projects just for the ones that the Prime Minister himself supports. So we've gone from a country where investors decide based on market conditions to politicians pick. That's not a sustainable way to grow an economy.
There's really nothing in here, though, that you can see on the face of it that would do exactly what you're spelling out. And just to push back, with respect on the idea that everything that was done in the last 10 years led to a flight of investment, that wasn't true. FDI increased largely over the 10 years. In fact, investment in the oil sector increased as well. I know your argument's going to be, well, it could have increased a lot more.
Well,
and there seems,
but the government had to spend billions of tax dollars to rescue TMX. That would not have happened before this Liberal government took office.
Yeah, but before that Liberal government took office, there wasn't a panacea of pipelines being built.
We had 4 major pipelines in the previous Conservative government, including
decreased the differential to the same degree.
Tidewater. We approved Northern Gateway. That was the pipeline that would have opened up Asian markets. That would have allowed us to sell our energy into China, into Japan, into India, all kinds of growing economies in Asia. The Liberals canceled that, and Mark Carney gave a big thumbs up and applauded Justin Trudeau when he did that. Look, we're
I'm just
going
pointing out, it wasn't like a dearth of investment. It wasn't a total there's nothing going on, and therefore anything they decide to do that builds on that this time around is inherently wrong.
Well, we have to look at the impact on this budget on Canadians. So what we see is an even bigger deficit and debt, and we know what that means. When you carry a balance on your credit card, you see what that interest does, and that comes right out of your monthly income. That's exactly what happens with government. This is not sustainable. We've had the parliamentary budget officer, even the Bank of Canada governor, ringing the alarm bell that this is not sustainable. The government is now saying that they're going to borrow even more money than Justin Trudeau. They're going to have to go out into the markets and borrow billions and billions of dollars. That means that every other Canadian that has to renew their mortgage, buy their first home, get a small business loan, has to now compete with the government for borrowing that money. Mark Carney is increasing direct program expenses by $25 billion over Justin Trudeau's last level. So this is a government that has come in after, Mark Carney as a Prime Minister has come in after 10 years of massive deficits, ballooning government bureaucracy, and said the answer is even more.
Okay, I'm out of time, but I think, am I safe to convey to Canadians that your party will not support the budget?
We cannot support a budget that tells Canadians that they have to sacrifice even more. We can't support a budget that doesn't have any affordability measures to bring down the cost of things like groceries.
Okay, I have to leave it on that note. Mr. Scheer, I appreciate your time as always. Thank you, Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer. We'll take a quick commercial break here on this special edition of Power Play. Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne is still to come. Stay right there.
Confidence in the strength of Canadians, Mr. Speaker. I have confidence in our ability as a nation to meet the moment.
And on behalf of all the Canadians who can no longer afford to eat, heat, or house themselves because of Liberal inflation, we Conservatives cannot support this costly Liberal budget.
I hardly see how, after having met with our caucus tonight, we could vote in favor of this budget.
There are some record investments, but it also is, cutting public services that Canadians need. So this is something that we'll be taking a very close look at.
There are several days in which this budget can be negotiated and amended before it goes to a vote.
The federal budget has been tabled in the House of Commons, and there is reaction from opposition party leaders, largely, aside from the NDP's interim leader, Don Davies, who say they will not support this budget. We're in a minority government, so that really matters. Opposition support will be essential for passing the budget. I'm here with our front bench. They're back, Brian Gallant, James Moore, and Tom Mulcair. James, I might just start with you on the other news of the day, which we just spoke to Mr. Scheer about. Chris D'Entremont, Atlantic Canada MP, I believe from Nova Scotia, deciding to leave caucus. Any initial reaction to that?
One more vote for Mark Carney. Conservative caucus is a little bit smaller. Quite frankly, I don't know that many people outside of his riding or Parliament Hill really know who he is. But, certainly a bit of a shot to Pierre Poilievre. But I don't think it's a broader material consequence past the budget vote in terms of, the Conservative caucus.
Significant at all, Brian, that it's happening on budget day?
Significant in the sense that it feels quite planned. Obviously, you sort of do it now in a bit of a maximal hit to the Conservatives and maybe a bit of a plus for the Liberals in the sense that I saw the budget and it's a good one, and or I don't like the reaction of my leader. So it was planned, obviously, and look, the numbers are such that one extra vote will potentially make a difference.
Tom, what do you think about that?
Well, D'Entremont is a well-liked person, and by the way, being from Nova Scotia, a lot of people in that province really like Mr. Carney, and he's one of those people who's been around the House. He knows the rules. He'll be very helpful in caucus, and his French is pretty nigh fluent, so pretty darn good catch for the Libs, I have to say.
Let's circle back to the budget. That's obviously why we're here today. James, do you think that the government accomplished a story out of this budget, like a specific story that they can now take on the road and tell Canadians and that will resonate with them?
Not really. Look, one of the, I think, golden rules of politics, and it's actually a good rule in life, right, is under promise and over deliver. And this government, I think, from day one has been doing the inverse of that, and I think it's a problem. The challenge I think that this budget is going to have in the fullness of time is that we're actually in a bit of a race against time here. On the positive side, and the best possible interpretation of what this budget could mean, more spending on major projects, well, that's positive. More spending on military procurement, that's positive. And salaries, that's positive. The tax measures to incent more reinvestment by business into the economy, those things are positive. But there's a long lag between the announcement of this policy, the implementation of it, and seeing those things be realized in terms of real economic benefit. On the other side, we have the constant threat of Donald Trump and the tariff imposition. We have a slowdown of the Canadian economy that's happening, a narrowing of the job picture in a very negative way, especially for young Canadians. And in the budget itself, they show a ramping down of immigration inflows into the country. And we know that the overinflated immigration inflows into the Canadian economy has artificially bumped up the Canadian economy. So there's going to be a downward pull there as well. So the measures in their best possible outcome are going to have a longer impact, sort of ramp up phase, if you understand what I'm saying. But the negative draws on the economy are going to be real. So there's a race against time to see these policies mitigate the risks to the Canadian economy. And there's going to be still a minority parliament and all the politics swirling around it as this is going on. So they definitely need to do a roadshow. Whether or not their narrative is going to be able to be persuasive to Canadians is going to be really a race against time.
Yeah, I imagine, and Brian, you kind of alluded to this in the last segment, like that is the conundrum they face. They've got these, macro things that they're pitching, which in theory I very much understand could translate to improve my life down the road, particularly in the face of the threat to the United States. But if I am unable to pay for $12 berries tomorrow, there isn't even really much of an acknowledgement in here that that's the case. And I'm not saying they have a magic policy to fix that, but even from a communications perspective, they didn't put a whole lot of effort into addressing that.
Well, let me build on what I was saying and what James was saying as well. I do think they're going to have a bit of a tough time to be able to have this sort of central narrative from this budget. As I explained in the last segment, I mean, that is normal for governments. Maybe a little more pronounced this time, though, because we have somebody that's coming in that I think has a brand of being fiscally responsible, even though obviously it's his first time in government, but given his previous positions and his background. So I think people are going to say to themselves, okay, he's going to manage the budget well and he's going to make good investments for the economy. And that may be the case, but the narrative that they're going to have to go with is, yeah, we're making these investments, and you saw them all get up, right? $1 trillion of investments over 5 years, I think they said, and they're all clapping and they get up. And that's a message that maybe they think will resonate to some extent, but then at the same time, they're going to be talking about some of their expenditure reductions, talking about some of the civil servant that will have some attrition going. So those aren't going to jive incredibly well. And to your point on the affordability, I think Scheer had a good line, right, to use. Basically, there's nothing in this budget about affordability to help affordability. I mean, I think Prime Minister Carney, in his view and the way he would describe it, is we need to create economic activity. We need to get more jobs. We need to sort of be able to get our house in order when it comes to the Canadian economy. And then we're going to have these opportunities for Canadians to make more money. But obviously, to your point, Vashi, that's not a great explanation for somebody that's having a tough time paying a bill this week. So again, yet another challenge that they're going to be facing when it comes to communicating the benefits of the budget.
Well, and the other assumption that's built in there is that this stuff that they've put in the window and in this budget, Tom, will accomplish that, right? And I'm not saying that it won't, but like James said, they're facing very difficult and unpredictable headwinds from the United States that could actually make the situation, for example, if CUSMA is at risk next year, much worse before it even starts to get better.
Yeah, I think that Jim's analysis of what's going to hit first, and as opposed to the theoretical stuff that's supposed to help, is spot on. It's unassailable. But I also think that the average Canadian has built a lot of that into their reasoning right now. And I do think that Carney has a storehouse of good faith on the part of most Canadians who say, look, this guy was dealt the hand that he's got. Trudeau left an absolute mess in terms of public finance and public administration. Trump is stranger by the week and the month. We're never sure what's actually going to happen. Even the most recently announced 10% tariffs haven't materialized, and we just don't know which foot we're supposed to be dancing on. So it's a very tough situation. I do think there's a lot of indulgence there. But I also believe that the fundamental mistake of overselling just how good this budget is going to come back to haunt them. I remember, I worked quite a bit because I was the NDP's finance critic then with Jim Flaherty, who had a very easy way of talking to ordinary folks and to Bay Street. And I'm looking at François-Philippe Champagne. I'm not taking anything away from his abilities, but I'm not sure he's got the capacity to talk to average folks the way Flaherty could. Maybe he's got an audience on Bay Street, especially with some of the announcements today with regard to the tax system. But overall, it's going to be a very tough sell now that they've pitched it as being transformational, generational. For future generations, it ain't great, because on the environment, Elizabeth May's right. This budget really falls short. Mark Carney knows more about the environment than any leader of the G7, but somehow his stamp didn't appear in this budget.
There's also and Tom referenced this, and so did Brian, James, but the spending side of the ledger, or the savings side, I should say, right? And on that, I read through every part of the budget, and it was like, this department will do this department will do this, but the word redundancy was used, I think I counted 17 times. Like, the specifics were not necessarily there outside of the job adjustments, as they call them. Do you see what they have announced on that side of things as impactful or profound, or living up to the way in which they telegraphed it would be?
Well, we'll see, but I'm not going to hold my breath. It's kind of, reading the budget document as well, Vashi, it's kind of like, the guy who you went to high school with, who's always planning on starting a business. He's always planning on going on a trip. He's always planning on starting a new diet. He's always planning on doing something, but it never kind of happens. These promises of reevaluation of government spending in a really big tectonic way that deliver real measurable results, they've been promised for a really long time, but they don't actually materialize. But building on Tom's point as well about the politics of this, and something that I think is missing, is that it seems to me when you read the budget document at a very high level, this budget document reads like it was written by an economist who has a majority government on his side and lots of runway in front of him. And half of that is true. And so what's missing from this budget are sort of the retail aspects of politics that are necessary. A 7% to 6% to 5% GST cut, a universal child care benefit, a tax credit, something tangible that people can feel on day one when the budget is passed, that'll put a little bit of cash in their jeans and a little bit of flexibility in their monthly budget. There's practical stuff that's not here, that's not tangible. So their sales pitch is going to have to be the macro and Trump and the fears and anxiety that the Canadians do feel. And believe me, sunnier days are going to come. The cuts may happen now, the disappointments might be now, but the benefits will be in the future. And that's not super satisfying to people who are looking for a couple $100 more now to give them a little bit of breathing room so they can feel a little confident about their spending picture going into the Christmas break. Like, it's just not there on the practical retail side of politics.
It's interesting because, I know there's a lot of criticism among this version of the Liberal Party and other parties, Brian, for the previous Trudeau government. But often in budgets, that party, under Trudeau did a good job of that, right? There was something in there that you could say is different for my life tomorrow, whereas it's very hard to ascertain that in this budget. Does that ultimately impact their ability to have it resonate with Canadians? Like, is this going to feel generational for Canadians tomorrow?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of layers to that question, in the sense that when you announce something that is a little more retail, as James is suggesting, there's no question that can be more easily understood. People will talk about it at the dinner table. They'll talk about it when they're sort of waiting for their kids to pick them up at daycare. And they'll say, hey, did you hear about that tax credit? Or did you hear about that new program? That's going to be great for us, great for whatever. Not a lot of that in here. There's no question. But at the same time, another layer to your question, I think, also has to be that I think a lot of people would have criticized the Trudeau era with too much of that and not enough on the macro, and being worried about where are we really going with all of this, and what is the plan for us to increase our productivity and ensure that we're prosperous for years to come. What's the plan for our finances? I think that was probably a big criticism. So most likely there's a lot of, whether it's people from the Trudeau government, Carney himself, that are saying, no, we're going to change our approach and we're going to focus on the macro. Now, the third layer and last layer I'll share is the communications. Although I think a lot of Canadians might say to themselves, yeah, maybe it is time we focus a little bit more on the sort of bigger themes and less on the retail stuff. The communication of it will be difficult. There's no question. It's very hard to try to explain these big concepts in small little tidbits. And certainly when there's going to be other things that might be a little more interesting for media to cover.
Tom, the last 30 seconds goes to you. Mr. Champagne, the finance minister, has just sat down next to me, so I got to give Tom Mulcair the last word.
I know.
Yeah,
I sat in the house when he was there, and he's very good. So
he wants to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. For sure.
I'll ask him why he doesn't put back the $2 billion tree program. Getting rid of it makes no sense at all when we've lost over 8 billion trees to wildfires just during the 2023 season.
Okay, well, we'll put that question to the minister in a moment. Tom's worried about the 2 billion trees. Thank you so much. Tom Mulcair, Brian Gallant, and James Moore, our front bench panel. And as I did telegraph, the Minister of Finance, François-Philippe Champagne, does join me live right here in the foyer. Minister, it's a pleasure to see you. Thank you for making the time.
Well, it's good. You have a great panel.
Yeah, I do. I'm very lucky. Minister, in this budget, you substantially increased the size of the deficit and debt load. Based on a pitch that you will catalyze $500 billion in additional private investment in this country over the next 5 years, how do you know that will happen?
Well, first of all, it's not how much you buy or borrow, but why. And I think that's really the question that this budget answers, because people understand now better the difference between expense and investment. This is an investment budget. So the money that is going to be borrowed, you saw that in 28, 29, we're going to be matching our operating expenses with our revenues. So what you will see after these years is really investment in the Canadian economy. And why I believe in that, just take the example of a mine. So think about the last mile and the first mile and last mile tax credit we have offered, for example, or the one for critical mineral. Well, if you do these kind of things, you're enabling, obviously, private investment. I would say Canada will be the most competitive jurisdiction on a tax basis, probably of the OECD. And then you would catalyze it by the province, by the municipality, and obviously, first and foremost, the private sector. So this is really to supercharge growth. You know, you've seen the super deduction we've done for people who want to invest in plant and equipment, in technology, in building. I mean, we're addressing the productivity and competitiveness challenge that this country has been facing for a very long time. So that's why I think this is an investment budget, and the way for us to grow our economy is to invest and to provide the incentives in order for the private sector to bring and to have these investments in our country.
And I do take that point, but I am, I would say my impression after going through the budget is the pitch is we have to spend this much. I know you're going to say invest, but you're spending money, you're spending taxpayer money in order to garner a significant growth in the return on investment. And my question to you is how do you know that return will come? And I put to you with great respect, you were the ministry who oversaw decisions to put a ton of taxpayer money into the EV sector that is now blowing up in all our faces.
Well, I mean, don't take it from me, take it from the International Monetary Fund. We first said the two countries of the G7 and in the world that stand out is Canada and Germany. And secondly, they said, well, smart economies that have the fiscal capacity. And when I say it's generational, what we've done in Canada compares very well to what Germany has been doing, which is the largest economy in Europe and their generational infrastructure plan that you've seen. And what the International Monetary Fund said is that countries should be investing in infrastructure, in housing and productivity, because that's where you have the greatest multiplier. So obviously, when you make these investments, you know the multipliers, and you can see the impact on the economy. And that's why I say this is the kind of thing we needed to do in this country. People understand at home we have some headwinds. The world has changed. We live in a very different world, and the way forward for us, and I know you would want to use the word spending, but folks at home understand. When you go to the grocery store, you spend. When you buy a house, you invest. For government, it's about the same. We need to, that's why we did the tough exercise of finding $60 billion, because we say we need to spend less to invest more. Put our house in order. Canadians have been doing it at home. They've been tightening their belt. We did the same. But now it's the time to grow the economy, invest in housing, in our defense and our sovereignty.
And I do have questions about those savings. But as you speak, it reminds me so clearly of a message you delivered as a different kind of minister under a different prime minister, but from the same party. When over and over the refrain from your government at the time was confident Canadians invest in themselves. And the promise was also for economic growth. Instead, what happened on a per capita basis is that GDP declined by 2.5% below pre-pandemic levels over the last 5 years. Liberals were not able to deliver on the promise that you're making tonight. Why is this time any different?
But in fairness, Vashi, in fairness, the world has changed. I mean, people understand at home. The scope, speed, and scale of the change, I wish you would be at the G7 with me. When we sit together, we say what we're seeing today is unprecedented, probably since 1945. So you can compare a period before the world changed, when our largest trading partner decided to change the rules of the game, not only for Canada, but for the world. You know, pretty much every country of the world.
I understand.
So the world has changed so
the world has
significantly
changed.
that you can compare these two periods. It's like if you.
But really, because you're saying the exact same things. We need to invest in ourselves in order to get a return on the investment, and you're guaranteeing that will come when it never did before.
Well, I would say if you look at the things where you invest, and don't take it from me, go back to the International Monetary Fund, what they say. You don't need to take it
You're
from me.
You're the minister, though. I want to take it from you. Canadians are looking to you for answers.
I've been saying it very loud and clear. If you invest in infrastructure, if you invest in housing, if you invest in productivity and competitiveness, that's the way to grow the economy. And by making these investments, that's how we can make sure. That's why we say our investment will enable $1 trillion of investment, because if we're, my example of the mine, if you have, because of the incentive, the private sector investing, municipalities will be building a community around. The province think about the Ring of Fire will come and will do their part. That's the kind of thing we need in this country. So we are investing in the type of things that will make Canada stronger. We have the fiscal capacity. There's only about 2 countries which in the G7 people would recognize to say have the capacity. And so we're taking that fiscal capacity to make sure we grow the economy. And by growing the economy, that's how you protect jobs. That's why you have the future. My message to people at home, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. It's a tough world. It's very different. You and I have lived different crises, but this one is like we've not had seen in a long time. But we're going to be okay because we've put our finance in order. We have the fiscal capacity. We're going to invest smartly. At the same time, we'll reduce our operating expenses.
So you flagged, for, as an example, mines, right, in the Ring of Fire, and that's on critical minerals, all part of the energy sector. What we had heard from that sector, loud and clear heading into this budget process, was in order to spur growth of the sector, they would need to see things that they've identified as irritants removed. You have, in this budget, signaled, not said for sure, but signaled that the emissions cap will be removed. You haven't actually repealed it. But what about other stuff? What about the tanker ban? What about C-69? If you truly wanted to catalyze private investment and economic growth in the energy sector, why are you only bringing about half measures to do it?
Well, look at the major project office. Look at LNG Canada 2. Look at the project we have selected. Look at the Port of Montreal expansion. I mean, we may not talk to the same people, but when I talked to the CEOs, they were very happy about what they saw because they understand that now we're making that shift towards growth. We're having the major project office. We are now, if you look at the marginal effective tax rate, which is really not what necessarily people at home would look, but if you're a chief financial officer of a company, what you're looking is how much is the tax rate. Canada is more competitive than the Americans now. Imagine. So you're talking to a company, and most Canadian companies have operation on both sides of the border. Today, with this budget, Canada is more competitive than investing in the United States. That's a huge thing. Because when people have a choice, they will decide where we are competitive. So we are more competitive on the tax side. We have put a number of measures for critical minerals. We're going to power the economy of the 21st century. When it comes to major project, we said, one project, one review, we're going to do better. And those that I've talked to would say, Minister, we've been listening to the business community. We've been listening to investors. We say, what would you need to make Canada the place to invest? And honestly, with the measures we have in the budget today, on the tax side, on the tax credit, think about the super deduction.
With respect, though, Minister, are you talking to the conventional energy players in this country who have felt as though their ability to expand has been greatly hindered by the policies that your government, the previous government, put in place? There is an acknowledgement of that in here in the removal of, or the intended removal, not explicit removal, intended removal of the emissions cap. But beyond that, if you were truly serious about supercharging the conventional energy sector, making us an energy superpower, why would you not do more in that vein? That wouldn't cost taxpayers anything.
Well, listen, it's already a lot. I mean, we're going to be more competitive than the United States. That's a shift that we've not seen in a long time. And this is even after the big, beautiful thing. You think that's going to get a pipeline built?
Well,
I would say this is going to make the investment in Canada, if people have a choice, they're looking at these type of things. And when you talk to the sector, I mean, I don't know, we may have talked to different people, but when I talk to the CEOs in the sector, They've seen what Canada's doing. They see the major project office. They see that we're serious. They've seen the tax credit. They've seen the approach we're taking to make sure that we are a global energy superpower. Look at LNG Canada too. Canada will be one of the countries in the world.
That has been in development for 10 years. With all due respect, it was put on the major projects list because it's just needs to get over the finish line.
But we should be happy.
I'm not
you should be happy. I mean, there's something to be happy in the budget.
There's the potential for another oil pipeline. My question to you is whether what you're doing is going to incentivize
well,
that.
I would say when you are the most competitive tax jurisdiction, when you compare to the U.S., that is incentive that people will look at. We've talked to the people in the sector, and I would say we should really look at what we've done for Canada. This is a generational shift. We're taking steps that are going to make Canada look very different. Provide prosperity, provide jobs, provide growth. And at the same time, we're doing the smart thing that we need to do for a long time, and the time is to do it now. And so that's why I think if you look on the tax side, I'm very, very confident because compare that to the United States. That's what you need to do, Vashi, because you have to compare what we do to the U.S.
The amount of conventional energy investment in the United States has been going at a rate that far exceeds anything that's being happening in Canada. But I take your point. You think it's going to change?
The budget.
Okay.
Give me a chance. We just issued the budget an hour ago.
Let's see what happens. I hope for the best.
Give me a chance.
One final question, if you don't mind, Minister. I know your time is limited. And I do want to ask on behalf of Canadians who are listening tonight and listening to your points about how what you've done in this budget is intended to spur economic growth over the mid to long term, and wondering why isn't there something in this to help me pay for $12 berries tomorrow, to help me pay for groceries that have increased by 30%, for example, over the last 5 years. I'm old enough to remember not too long ago when you were the Minister of Industry, you said, we're going to get those prices down. That didn't materialize. Why isn't there more in this budget to address the immediate affordability needs of Canadians?
Well, that's the first thing we did, was to reduce taxes for 22 million Canadians.
But they're still hurting.
Well, and that's why we need more affordability measure. But one of the
Why aren't they in the budget?
Well, there's one, which it calls about building Canada homes, because if you can build more affordable housing in the country, you're making that more affordable for Canadians. So there are a number of things in the budget to make life more affordable for Canadians. Affordability of homes is one of the most concerning things across the nation, and we're acting on that. So I would say if you're a Canadian today, look at the measures we've put, for example, for workers that have been affected. Because you say, if you look at the trade with the United States, if you're a steel worker today, or if you're in the lumber industry, if you're the coal, these things have been hurting. And when you refer to the deficit, 75% of what we did this year was for our sovereignty or affordability. Look at the measure in the budget. You mentioned you started with the deficit, but if you look at it, a good part of that was really to make life more affordable for Canadians and making sure that we take steps to make life more affordable, to protect our workers, to support our industry, to pivot our industry. So I would say Canadians will recognize themselves in this budget, and it's really a turning point for Canada where we make sure that our borrowing is to support growth. And that's what we're going to be doing on a going forward basis.
The NDP wants post-budget negotiations. Will you provide that?
Well, I think that the Canadians have heard, and there's so many measures there. I mean, even the Canadian Labour Congress came out and said this budget.
I'm just asking, are you willing to negotiate with them? They're saying
listen to the Canadian Labour Congress, which said, thanks God, this government have put workers at the heart of their economic strategy. That's pretty convincing to me. It's not me saying that.
Is that a yes or a no?
Well, you should ask them. I'm sure they're going to come on your show. I come all the time. You invite me. Maybe they'll come.
Okay, we hope to see you again soon. Minister, a pleasure as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Federal Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne, fresh off, of course, delivering the federal budget in the House of Commons. We are going to continue to have a ton of reaction to that budget throughout the evening and into tomorrow right here on CTV News Channel. That does it for this special edition of Power Play. I'm Vashi Kapelos. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.